Now we see loaded heavyweight staggering around the ring. Putin has Parkinson's disease or that he has cancer. I sometimes think this is a wish more than it is a true analysis. You know, people complain about Fox News in the way that, but we don't have Solovyov everywhere, or Kiselev, or all these lucky.
Hi, my name is Michael Ziger. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel because every week I speak to the greatest minds of humanity and I want you to join me. And today my guest is David Remnick, one of the best known American journalists, specialists on Russia, and also editor-in-chief of the New Yorker magazine. Hi David, thank you for your time. I want to start with a question about your book. Actually, I'm one of the biggest fans of your book, Lenin's Tomb. And you wrote it a long time ago when the Soviet Union was collapsing, when Russia was saying farewell to communism, totalitarianism, and probably you could not imagine that it would be back. So now we see that if not Lenin, but Stalin is jumping out of his tomb. In the Soviet period, they used to say that Lenin was alive, and now we see that obviously not Lenin, but Stalin is alive, right?
I don't know what to call him except for Putin. I don't know that he's Stalin or all the other comparisons. Mm-hmm. Seems to me being Putin is enough. Mm-hmm. I say this, Misha, I did not think history was over. You remember the Francis Fukuyama, history is over. That just seemed to me absurd. And the notion that every major debating point about how we should arrange the way we live, ideologically, economically, and politically, that seemed absurd. But I have to admit, you know, this is before your time, but in 1991, I was extremely optimistic. Even though one knew that after 1,000 years of autocracy and 70-odd years of Bolshevism, totalitarianism, call it what you will, there was reason to be optimistic, really optimistic. And so to live through what we're living through now, and not only now, but so much of the last 15, 20 years is horrifying.
Do you think that Putin's death is the only solution? As you wrote about Lenin's tomb, now Putin's tomb is the only way out of this global catastrophe.
I think it's very interesting to watch unnamed intelligence analysts and some of the periphery of the commentariat, and then various professors, Mark Galeotti and so on, tell us that Putin has Parkinson's disease or that he has cancer. I sometimes think this is a wish more than it is a true analysis. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe it's so, but I don't think that's a useful means of speculation for the moment. He's in charge of every decision, however horrendous those decisions are. So it's hard for me to imagine in the way he has arranged his Kremlin, which you describe so vividly in your own book, and his increasing isolation, physically and mentally. It's very hard to imagine a coup in the classic sense. You know, when Brezhnev and company pushed out Khrushchev, Khrushchev was, of course, the dictator, but there was a measure of a collective leadership in the old style Kremlin. right? And there was a measure of collective leadership even in Gorbachev's late Soviet period Kremlin, which led to a
even more
3-day-long coup. So that people like Khrushchev, Pavlov, Yanayev, all these people who we think of as non-entities, they did have a measure of power. They had the capacity to isolate and overthrow, even briefly, Gorbachev. Again, I don't pretend to know even a fraction of what you know about the inner workings of the contemporary Kremlin, but my impression is, by every analyst that I've come to trust, including your own good self, that it's quite different and more singular than we've ever seen in the Soviet period or the post-Soviet period.
Mm-hmm.
You agree, Misha?
As you don't believe in any kind of a coup, and you
But my job, here's the thing, my job is not to believe, and it's not my job to predict. It's not fortune telling. I think it's our job to analyze and be sensible about what we see in front of our faces.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is an important distinction. At least that's the way I look at mine.
Every time we start thinking about the outcome of this war, we cannot see any horizon. How can this war be stopped?
Well, you have an innate contradiction. The innate contradiction, there was a cliche in English at least. What is the off-ramp? That was the cliche. I'd never heard that cliche before, the off-ramp, as if history were a highway in Los Angeles and you're looking for your ramp to go to Santa Monica or wherever. And the off-ramp, you know, the conventional wisdom of the off-ramp for Putin was that he would gain a sufficient amount of territory in Ukraine, Donbass, Crimea, obviously, and some, either all or part of the extremely valuable Black Sea coast. Well, why would Ukraine put up with that in any which way? Well, why would Ukraine say, well, oh yeah, sure, you've now destroyed cities and killed thousands and thousands of Ukrainians and invaded my country. By all means, take half of it. That's innately a contradiction. Right now, we just saw Henry Kissinger, who I know that Putin believes to be the font of all wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Henry Kissinger in Davos in his mid to late 90s, saying that in order for there to be peace, Ukraine has to give up significant territory in Ukraine. Well, let's forget for a moment the moral outrage of that statement. Why in the world would Ukrainians do that? What even tiny indication has Ukraine showed toward wanting to do such a thing? Ukraine has stunned the world by its willingness and its sense of urgency in the military and civic sense. Ukraine's not giving up. It's just not in the cards. So I think this is going to go on for quite a while, unfortunately. Barring some unforeseen event in Moscow, particularly, having to do with the fate of Putin himself, the notion that Putin will come to his senses and see this as a disaster, even in the United States, and I don't want to make invidious comparisons and this equals that, but even in a country where there are politics, actual politics, it took us how long to get out of Afghanistan? How many years? It just went on and on and on and on. And so the idea that a country that does not have politics in the standard sense, where the political realm exists in the box that's inside of Putin's brain, is going to suddenly reverse course. That's quite difficult to imagine.
How could that happen? How come the American intelligence and actually the whole world could be so wrong about Ukrainian capacity and Ukrainian ability to resist the Russian aggression? Everyone was pretty sure, including Putin and Joe Biden, that President Zelensky would run away.
I would disagree with you. No. Yeah, I would disagree with you slightly, Misha. I would say that American intelligence didn't radically underestimate Ukraine, because after all, we knew quite a lot about Ukraine.
But overestimated the Russian army.
Overestimated Russia. I remember reading, as you do, about the great military mastermind Gerasimov and how he has revolutionized asymmetrical warfare and being completely bowled over by the operation in Crimea, and how quiet and quick and little green men. That gave a impression that the Russian military and the Russian security apparatuses had not only modernized themselves, but had kind of became innovators in the field. As we say in sports, that they were fighting above their weight. In other words, a middleweight fighter was fighting at a heavyweight level. Now we see a bloated heavyweight staggering around the ring, but simply because of its armatures, simply because of its capacity to lob missile after missile and keep at it, they're doing tremendous human damage to Ukraine. I think the talk of a Ukrainian military victory, if we're being, cold-eyed, is let's not get ahead of ourselves here. It's not a matter of what I wish for, but in a purely analytical terms, let's not underestimate the willingness of what Putin is willing to do.
Usually when we're talking about the last remaining possibilities for Putin, we start thinking about the nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
Do you think that could happen? Do you think Putin can press the button? And what can happen next? Is there any reason for it?
Reason is not the element here.
Yeah.
Reason would tell you not to invade Ukraine. Reason would tell you to cut your losses and go home. Reason would tell you that the best thing to do in Putin's position is to try to maximize the well-being of his people. Reason would tell you many things that Putin has defied over and over again. So, most military and intelligence analysts in the United States, although they're worried about the, so-called tactical nuclear weapon, battlefield nuclear weapon, still don't think that he would do it. But I think anybody is a fool to rule things out. I think that's the most you can say. Again, you are depending on the sense and sensibility of someone who one believed to be purely rational. That no longer is the case.
So is now Vladimir Zelensky a new leader of the free world? Like when we see an article about President Zelensky written by Joe Biden.
In Time magazine?
Yeah.
I'm sure, my guess is Joe Biden did not sit down with a pen and write.
But still it was.
No, that's a political gesture of respect, of admiration, of alliance. No, I think, well, the free world is a complicated phrase and has a long history, but it is to Putin's one great accomplishment. His one great accomplishment in invading Ukraine was to solidify Ukrainian nationhood. He succeeded in doing exactly what he did not want to do. And no matter what the outcome is in Ukraine in the next 6 months, he will ensure that Ukraine and all the generations of Ukrainian school children to come will despise Russia until a lot of time elapses. We've seen this over and over again historically. That's Putin's great accomplishment here. Ukrainian nationhood.
And as you've mentioned,
I was just talking to, we've had a number of correspondents in Ukraine, Luke Mogelson, Josh Yaffa, Masha Gessen, who's probably somebody you know. And, people that have been in Donbass say, yes, it's true. You would meet people in Donbass who would they were kind of confused about, the Russianness as opposed to Ukrainianness and so on, and issues about language and culture and geography and all the things No more confusion.
Okay, you've mentioned the people despising Russia and Russians and Russian language. And as a person who spent several years studying Russian culture and Russian language, how could you describe its future, the future of Russian culture? Probably the new attitude, not only in Ukraine, but globally.
I think most people understand that the invasion of Ukraine was not executed upon a popular vote of the Russian people. I think people refer to it much more often as Putin's invasion. And of course, a huge component of that invasion is an information war within Russia, a propaganda war. One of the ancillary tragedies of this episode in history is that somebody like you is sitting in London.
I'm in Berlin, but yeah, you're right. That's not much difference.
Yeah.
And that a lot of your friends are probably sitting in Yerevan, Tbilisi, Washington, New York. There's a huge flow. It's almost like a century ago, the flow of Russian intellectuals to Constantinople. And the only thing that draws them back is they can't get their money out of the ATM. And I think that the damage to Russian culture and Russian confidence is tremendous because of that, in addition to the tremendous blow to the Russian economy. I thought it was extremely significant. I don't know if you agree with me. You're starting to see people have the nerve in high or modestly high places to speak out against the war. So I don't know if it was on Solovyov or something on state television, a Polkovnik, it was some show like.
Yeah, you're right. If I'm not mistaken, his name was Colonel Khodaryonok.
Something like that. So he gets up and he gives a very cool analysis that seemed to shock everybody else about what was going on. Just an analysis of military loss and discombobulation. And 2 days later, he kind of took it back. Obviously, he had he was, as they say in English, taken to the woodshed. Somebody gave him a stern talking to. And then you see a diplomat, a pretty high-ranking diplomat in Western Europe a couple of days ago, very outspokenly saying he's ashamed of his country, that he's sorry that it took him so long to make this statement. He clearly wanted to make sure his family would be okay and all the arrangements were all right. So I don't know. And then you're hearing things on Twitter from quite good sources, talking about dissent, conflict, disarray in the Fifth Directorate, in various directorates of the state security apparatus, in the military, firings of people at high levels in the military. This kind of discombobulation, this kind of trouble, a kind of conflict may turn out to be a sign of something even deeper. So we'll have to see. I just don't believe in prediction. This is journalism and analysis, not gambling, or fortune telling.
You probably know that the part of Russian population that is strongly opposing the war and is now shocked and devastated. But at the same time, that people are deeply polarized, and that those people who stayed in Russia now feel that they are blamed and hated by some of those who have left.
But let's remember a very basic human thing. True courage is rare. The courage to put yourself at risk or your family at risk is extremely rare. In 1968, Soviet Union invades Prague. Tanks go in to crush the Prague Spring. How many people came to Red Square? 100,000? 10,000? No, eight. Eight people.
Yeah.
8 people, right? And they were arrested and beaten up by the KGB within, I believe, 1 to 2 minutes. And they all went to, just about everybody in that group, except the baby in the stroller, went to jail, including Natalia Gorbachev.
Actually, only 7 out of 8, because the youngest one, Tatiana Baeva, claimed that she was just passing by and they let her go.
Yeah, so Tanya Baeva, whom I knew in Moscow many years ago, yes, and so Gorbanevska, Litvinov, all of them. And yet, even though it was only 8 people, it became an inspiration for an important strain in Soviet life, the dissident movement. But the dissident movement was tiny. It was tiny.
How can we blame those people who stayed in Russia now? How dare we think that they are accomplices?
I agree with you. I look at Navalny. And Navalny doesn't look like, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He doesn't look like a 19th century man with a beard. He doesn't look like Sakharov, kind of with the weight of the world on his shoulder. He's an incredibly handsome, charismatic, young, vital man who looks like in another life he would be, at Goldman Sachs or teaching at Harvard or MGU or wherever. And yet he is suffering in prison no less than Solzhenitsyn was in prison. And his family is suffering his loss. He's losing weight, and he came close to dying when he was on hunger strike. They tried to poison him to death, one of the most black comedy attempts one could imagine. Who's willing to risk that? How many people are willing to risk that? I bravely sit here and write, my little editorials in the New Yorker magazine, knowing that I'll go home at night to a warm bed and a hot meal and air conditioning. No one's going to kill me here. So for me to condemn the ordinary Russian citizen for not risking prison or worse seems to me morally outrageous. And I don't.
Another question is very important for many Russians, no matter if they left or stayed. And yes, we know that when we're watching the war that is still going on in Ukraine, that's our main issue, and that's the main thing that makes us worry and feel pain. But at the same time, there is another pain for many Russians, and that's the idea that the whole Russian culture is to blame. And the Russian literature has its imperialist roots, and the Russian culture is the reason for this war. And that's why it should be eradicated, it should be cancelled. And we still hear that, and we are thinking about that.
I think one thing is to put pressure on a figure like Gergiev, because Gergiev, the conductor, great musician in Petersburg and so on, Gergiev is, his participation in the regime is enthusiastic. But am I also going to cancel Sorokin? Am I also, stop buying the your books? No. I think there are. It's not just shades of difference, but enormous differences.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's still an issue. And many Ukrainians say that actually classical Russian culture and classical Russian literature was based on the principle that Russian people are supreme. And even Tolstoy, when he wrote War and Peace, he wrote about the God-bearing people. And Pushkin in Poltava, he wrote about Peter the Great, and he considered him to be a hero and Mazepa to be a traitor. And even Joseph Brodsky, the Nobel Prize winner, wrote his infamous poem about the Ukrainian independence, and from today's point of view, it looks very imperialistic. And definitely we should analyze this experience, and we should think much more about it.
Well, I first started reporting on Ukrainian independence movement in 1989. And I would go to, and the easiest place to find its center was in what we used to call Lvov. It was tiny. It was tiny. It was, Bogdan and Mikhail Gordon, I guess it was now then said, Vyacheslav Chernovil, but it was a circle that you could fit into two apartments. It was a subterranean movement that obviously had deep historical roots, having to do with religion and culture and language and all the rest. And now we're talking about Lvov and not Donetsk. This obviously changed. But there were deep currents of Ukrainian nationalism. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, in the process, what was the final straw that broke the back of the Soviet Union? It was an independence referendum in Ukraine, in which Ukrainians voted 92% in favor of independence and sovereignty. Ukrainian animosity toward Russia is understandable. It's hard for me to deny it or even referee it. But I think it's banal and stupid to have a wholesale condemnation of Russian culture, capital R, capital C, because of this issue. It's just absurd.
Do you agree with Timothy Snyder that current Russia is a fascist state?
Well, I don't know what his I did read this piece, his rationale for this, why he would go, suddenly from Monday to Tuesday, change from either authoritarian to fascistic. So I don't have an answer for you on that, Michael. Mm-hmm. Not because I'm trying to crawl out the door or be a chicken about it. I respect Timothy Snyder a great deal. To call the entire state and its structure fascistic is something quite bold, and I think he's trying to. I think Timothy Snyder's role for years now has been to awaken the West, to jolt it awake, whether it has to do with Russian politics, Putin himself, Ukraine, but also American politics. I think, like Masha Gessen, he's very eager to, and I think rightly, to wake people up from their slumber. I think they're right. In that case, they're right. And that goes for my own country. And for example, I'm not equating the two.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a powerful strain in the United States of, let's just call it the authoritarian temptation. We were to re-elect Donald Trump, we would go a long way toward giving into that. And the damage to this political culture, which for sure has its flaws and its hard times historically, I think it would be hard to recover from.
Do you think that temptation is over now? Or is it a part of a bigger trend?
I think it's always existed. Democracy is fragile. It's incredibly fragile. And not everybody loves it, right? I mean, not everybody loves it. Democracy is not necessarily even the most efficient form of a state organization. I think one thing that at least a lot of Americans are recognizing today is that we took these institutions democracy, separation of powers, political parties, and so on for granted. Turns out they're extremely delicate. We had an experience where all three branches of government, members of Congress, possibly members of the Supreme Court, and the President of the United States participated in the attempt to reverse a popular election.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very, very dangerous moment, and we barely escaped it. And now, in the phase of investigating that moment, still 40% of the country still believes. And by the way, imagine, if people complain about Fox News in the way that, we don't have Solovyov everywhere, or Kiselev, or all these duraki. They're not everywhere. We have them, but we have choices. But even with those choices, we have 40% of the people think that this is the case. So I'm not so quick to think Americans are innately terrific and Russians are innately awful. Americans are innately lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Big difference.
Don't you think that the American attention to this war is on decline?
A legitimate concern. People get bored. I give real credit to the journalistic outlets that have continued to pay attention to it a lot. I know that the New Yorker, we're continuing to send correspondents there and pay attention to it. I think CNN has done very well in the way they've covered the war, to say nothing of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and so on. So, and I realize it's a big difference between, quote, people and the press. And we have lots of other problems too. We have lots of other problems. Some of them I've just mentioned. So I worry about that too.
But if tomorrow it's not on the front page of every second American newspaper, and the Lend-Lease is over, and the American support probably is going to be over, and it's going to be treated as like another Eastern European problem.
I don't think we're at that point yet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and probably the last question. Impossible to answer, but still, that's a question about Russia's future. Do you think that Russia is doomed to be a dictatorship, or do you see any opportunity for Russia after Putin to overcome that catastrophe that happened to us?
Why not? I mean, I'm not a child, so I don't believe only good things happen. You had a situation when Yeltsin, a highly imperfect person, there was a moment when he was looking to give over power or to endorse not Vladimir Putin, but Boris Nemtsov. Circumstances changed. He grew, his health deteriorated. The economy got worse. He became more and more obsessed with his own security. The Chechen war was terrible, and he gave over power to an avatar of the security services, and things took the direction they took. But I don't think the opposite can't happen. But I don't think it's going to happen soon. Putin created a structure of power that you described very well that depended on him. But if you take Putin out of the equation, it's not like there's Boris Nemtsov down the hall.
Mm-hmm.
There's Shoigu, Gerasimov, all those other people we saw, Lavrov, all those other sterling individuals that we saw at the meeting of the National Security Council. I think it's going to take a long time. The damage done beyond the Ukrainian invasion, the damage done to political thinking, institutions that were very, very immature. The world of Dost and Echo Moskwy and, back in the day, Itorgi and NTV in the early days. These were extremely fragile, and now they're shattered. And even in the best of circumstances, it will take a long time to rebuild them. And that's just in the press. Obviously, that extends to everywhere.
Okay, David, thank you for your time and thank you for this conversation.
До встречи.
Yeah.